The road to authorship. It is very important for us to understand initially the beginning of literacy. And in order to understand authorship, it's important to understand how this was started or initiated. Forensic authorship is, in many ways, far removed from popular notion of what an author is, but in order to understand how we go about authorship, it's important to know and to form the idea of author, because when it comes to forensic linguistics, maybe the understanding of author is completely different from what you have studied in, maybe in poetry or maybe in novels, because that's what we call an author is someone who has written a text. Simple as that. But it's not that simple when it comes to forensic linguistics. So we need to understand this idea of author, and we'll move further to the authorship, and then route to authorship. The word author conjures up a number of archetypal images, most notably perhaps that of a novelist. And we believe that as an author is someone who has written something. Maybe it's some kind of poetry or something, like maybe a novel or something like that. um, Even in these days, we consider someone who writes something as, as an author. In fact, several of our conceptualizations of author stem from that of the romantic period, where it started to begin, authorship started to begin. Although we probably imagine that authors have always and already existed, like before that it existed, because when we study them, we trace it back to probably to the romantic period. Many readers will have been taught at school that in the ancient world, the poet Homer was one of the great authors of his age. However, it is important to be noticed that Homer was not literate. And if someone is not literate, how is it possible that they write? And if they do not write, then how come they become authors? So the question is there that um, Homer was just a reciter. Maybe Homer was someone who um, who used to recite these stories, and he was not a writer. So, because at that time, even stories were not written. Nothing was written. It was just narrated. It was recited. So he lived at a time when literacy was still relatively rare, and not at all as highly regarded as it came to be later. His great achievements was his ability to commit large tracts of poetry to memory, and this was something which was his achievement, that he remembered, and um, he remembered the poetry, and he was able to memorize it. And this achievement made him a great poet. For this, he used a number of mnemonic techniques described, which we are going to study later. In order to remember things, we just like in poetry and in songs, it's rhythmic. So there are different things that we do, and we use mnemonic techniques to remember the oral part of it. Just like in schools, children are rote memorizing things. Children are rote memorizing, or even in madrasas, you see that children are trying to learn, but the way they learn it is rhythmic. It's musical. It's rhythmic. So it's rhythmic and it's musical when they are reciting, or when they are learning something. And when you learn, and in order to make it easy, you use certain techniques where you're using repetition, where you're using rhythms and different techniques that we are going to discuss later. The role of memory in language use. The role of memory is wh- what is memory? Memory is something which as a human being, we remember things and we forget things, right? When we are writing things, it becomes permanent part of our not our memory, but that's what different studies state, that if you want children to learn something, and if you want children to memorize it in a better way, and in order to retain it for a longer period of time, they are supposed to write it down, because if you're doing it orally, you will not remember it forever. So it in that case, we can say that, the role of memory is very critical when it comes to writing. In our modern age, when where we are able to write things down, and we have availability of different materials like computer and keyboard and mobile phone and pen and ink. You see, if we don't have pen and ink, we always have mobiles in our hands, and we just write notes in that. We have no problem in keeping things in record, and um, in writing things down. So our need to commit to details of the memory is not as great as it was previously. So when previously, like, if you know that if I ask you to repeat five phone numbers in your mobile phone, you won't be able to do that. Why? Because we have never learned them by heart. Our memory is not trained because we have never trained it like that. We just save the number, and mm, we never learn it. We know that mobile phones are doing this task of of memorizing things, and we are not memorizing it ourselves. Same is the case with but the same was not the case with the old people, with old generations. They were trained, their brains were trained, their minds were trained to actually to learn numbers, to learn things. If you ask if you ask your parents, they'll remember each and every number even now, because previously it wasn't the case where they had these telephone numbers and they would remember it. Like they would remember it, and because they would memorize them, and that's how they have learned each and everything. They were good mathematicians. Every one of them was a mathematician, because nowadays, if we have to even do any kind of calculation, easy, yes, like for example 5 minus 3, we would still go for a calculator. But previously it wasn't the case, because things were not that available, and they would rely mostly on their memory. So the role of memory in language use is very, very important, um, because if you don't because if your brain is not trained to memorize things, you won't memorize the things properly. So and that is the part of forensics as well. Coming towards orality in early written language, which is very important, that is how it started. So we see that we have studied regarding Homer's epic, which was first transmitted orally. This was considered, maybe there were things before that, but we know that Homer's epics were the first transmitted orally. They orally transmitted, and it was something to take hold in the 18th century, which was largely through, as Walter Ong reports, the work of Frederick August Wolff. And Ong, in describing the work of Millman, Parry on poetic meter in the epics notes that written and oral language are structured differently from one another because of the limitations of memory. This was Ong who said that we um, we see that oral and written language is completely different from one another, and we can see the examples. Even Ong observes that we can find many examples of orality in ancient texts such as Bible, because or in many other texts as well, which were written previously, and we can see that they are right now in written, but they have this aspect of orality. In that aspect of orality is like poetry is written, but it is to be it is to be, it means it is for saying. It is not, it is something which you can say. It is something which is oral. It is something that has to be read out loud, and it's not something that has to be, just written. So but it's not the case with the novels. Novels are written, and novels, they normally don't have this aspect of orality. So this aspect of orality is very important in forensic linguistics. And why? Because for example, if someone has on gunpoint asked you to write a suicide note and then killed you, your this that is your writing. Definitely you have written it as a note. And if someone is killed, so you don't know whether the person has killed himself, or whether the note was truly the suicide note which was written by the person himself or herself. But it is through this orality factor in the text, in the written text, that you get to know that it was narrated to someone. It was dictated to the other person to write it down. And then they wrote it down, and then you get to know that, okay, fine, it is not written, and it was dictated, it was narrated, it was dictated, it was asked, right? It was something which is fabricated. So and there are certain things that we need to study. Additivity is a technique that these are the different factors, mnemonic techniques, which are used the for making a written text, for the aspects of the orality, through which they are making it easy for the people to learn and memorize this anything, language or anything, text, or maybe maybe poems. So additivity is a technique, and this technique is when we are joining anything by using the words like and, or additives. So you can see that it is there in almost poetry, that the in almost all the poetry, that the sentence starts with and, even though we do not start the sentence with and. But you'd see that each verse may start with and this is uh, for the memory, in order to memorize it, and to make it easy for the people to memorize it and to read it. Aggregation is the process of using multiple descriptors to emphasize aspects of an individual. So for example, it's for example, milk white skin, or long silky hair, like words like these, which are which are something which emphasizes the aspects of an individual character. Any It's not necessary that it is individual characters. It can be features of a place as well, or it can be some non-living object, um, mm, which is given some attributes, and some aspects are elaborated. So this aggregation also plays an important role when it comes to memory. Redundancy in written language, we have the text to refresh our memory if we become distracted, but spoken language is transient, and for this reason, according to Ong, redundancy is helpful. That is, it keeps the interactants in a conversation focused, and when you repeat things what you have already said, it makes it more interesting for the person in conversation. But when it is written and you are repeating the same thing again and again, it becomes very odd. So in written it's not done, it seems very artificial. But if you are actually speaking something, then a redundancy is always there. People repeat things, and repetition actually makes it more interesting. And we find redundancy in poetry as well, and in uh, which until the 18th century was largely an oral art. um, we see that um, in redundancy, things are said, um, words are used which are, which are not even needed, but those words are used in poetry, and it is elaborated even in written. So it's elaborated. It's this is the feature of orality as well. The next feature is of agonism, and agonism is uh, this is also a part of the oral language, and in that oral language we see that there's this use of agonistic or enthusiastic imagery, and we can see the way people describe things, and the way rhyme, alliteration, and rhythm is used in order to enhance the features, and rhetoric is used. It's the description is so in its description is done in such a way where two similar sounding words are placed together, and even paradoxes are used together in order to make it more easy for the people to learn, because this is part of oral feature, and in oral feature things like these are enhanced. So we can say that praise goes with the highly, this is an example, praise goes with the highly polarized agonistic oral world, and good and evil, virtue and vice, villains and heroes. This is something which is very it's enthusiastic imagery. It's the explanation of something which is done exaltedly, something which is rhythmic, which has alliteration, which has similar sounding words, or even opposite words which are complementing one another. You might have even heard songs like these in where such words, because they are all oral, right? Orality is there. That is why they are like that. Every ordinary, everyday oral discourse will often exhibit one or more of the above characteristics, and for this reason, we may be able to tell when a text which purports to have originated in written form is more likely to have resulted from spoken language or dictation. And this can be a question of importance in forensic work. And that is why we have studied all the above mentioned, but it's not necessary that we would only restrict it to the above mentioned features of orality. There could be other features of orality as well, and you can study them as well. Mm, Milman Parry's great insight into orality was the way in which meter was affected. He was able to see that very often a word was chosen not for its precise meaning, but because it is assisted the poem's meter at that point. And if you have ever been, a poet, or if you have ever written something which is poetical, you'd see that you always go for words which are, more, even if they won't represent the true meaning of what you want to say, but because they sound more like rhythmic, that's why you add them. Like, for example, there are different slogans. You can see that in these different slogans, people try to focus more on a rhythm and rhyme and meters, rather than they more focus on the meaning of the slogans. So the most focus is on the meters and rhyme and oral aspect of that, rather than meaning. The As an example, the Homeric epithets used for wine are all metrically different, and the use of a given epithet was determined not by its precise meanings so much as by the metrical needs. It's Homer's poetry can be taken as an example, and even in that poetry you can see that meaning is not important, but the meter is more important. So we can conclude that Homeric epics were actually originated from the oral language, and they were not written. Similarly, as we can state it by using this as an example, we can also state it by we can also state it regarding the orality factor in the forensic text as well. This is a complete process that is followed from the orality to the literacy, and this complete process is of, of different stages, where, when orally it was, the poetry started and it was, taken up by another person, and then it was corrected a little, and then it transferred from A to B, and from B to C, and from C to D, and so on. And you would see that there were some things added to it, maybe different performers added things to it, and they might have elaborated the songs, and maybe they might have changed it, maybe they might have corrected it, they have stabilized it, they have added some different words to that, replaced the previous words to that, and that's how it became the part of you know literacy. So this process not only tells us about the transition from morality to literacy, because eventually the recited works get written down, and the moment they get written down, it's a stamp on it, and you cannot make any changes in that. But it also gives us an insight into another aspect of language closely related to authorship, and that is genre, which we are going to also explore, and we are also going to analyze what is genre and how it helps in the analysis of forensic analysis. Also going to study that. If you look at this example in this excerpt, which is which is taken from the inaugural speech of President Obama, you can see that in this example, these these orality factor is there, You'd see that there is this use of and where it's not needed, but there is because it's oral. You'd see that there is repetition. You'll see that there are words which are more used because they are more rhythmic. There's rhythm, there's rhyme. If you read this, you see that we will restore science to its rightful place and wield technology's wonders to raise healthcare's quality and lower its cost. Now, it could have very easily been used without and, but still it is and because it's oral. We will harness the sun and the winds and the soil. You can see the wind and the soil and the see the similar meaning words are used. As I said, as I've explained that uh, opposite words are used. So sun and soil and to fuel our cars and run our factories, and we will transform our schools and colleges and universities to meet the demands of a new age. All this we can do, all this we will do. So this change of only one word from can to will is all because, and there's this repetition because they want to make it more rhythmic, and because this is oral, it's a speech. That's why it is made more it is oral. So you can see that if someone has written a text like this, in seconds you may know that this is something which was oral and it is transferred from oral to written. This means that it is dictated. So this was this was the lecture of today. I hope you understand it.